welcome to Punky's World. First off, I am wearing some of the makeup I got. I am wearing the beautiful Ulta nail polish, if my nails were prettier, and the Wet n Wild lipstick. I couldn't read the color. So it was in terrible lighting. I do like it though. And I did a thing. Through the store manager downtown, talked to a lady who sold me the makeup and asked her if she could give me a deal on buying out the rest of it. I loved it so much. So I'll let you know how that goes, and if I get that deal, we'll have another makeup haul, won't we? Now, today, I got a couple of things on the agenda for us. First, in this video, we're going to talk about the history of professional wrestling. I'm going to try not to bore you. I'll tell you stories along the way and stuff. Later today, we'll do making my pork rub, because I used some of it today in the crock pot on a big piece of pork that I cannot wait to eat. So we'll be doing that, and of course we'll be doing a genealogy video. I think I'm going to tell you some stories handed down through the generations about my family. That are part of the genealogy. Some happy, some sad, just depends. These glasses are driving me crazy. Okay, now on to this video, the history of professional wrestling. I have a line on my glasses, and it's driving me nuts. 1 second, guys. Oh, and I failed to mention before I shut this thing off so I could wash my glasses properly, as I'm sure all you glasses wearers understand, that later today we'll have a small grocery haul, just a downtown grocery haul, and later in the week we'll have a good grocery haul, because I'm going shopping with my friend. Actually, it'll be a whole Walmart haul. So anyway, the history of professional wrestling starts in the carnival circuit. And I think everyone knows that. The original promoters, were carnies. That's what they were. I'm trying to get this up. You can actually see me, but oh, you know what? I'm going in the wrong direction. There we go. We're carnies, and kind of started out with the strong man, and then it went on to, this guy's the toughest man in the land, and he'll fight anyone. And they have certain people in the audience that are put there, oh crap, I can't remember the word, to challenge the guy. Everyone else are called marks. Excuse me. I will try to find and link a glossary of wrestling terms with this video to make things a little bit easier. And a mark is a person that doesn't know any better. They think what they're seeing is the real deal. So they would have people that were put there on purpose. Why can I not think of the word for that? Plants. Jeez, you would have thought that was a horrible word. Complicated word. No, they have plants. And those are the people that challenge the guy beats them. Well, eventually, some promoter somewhere decided to branch out of the carnival and make wrestling a thing. No other way to put it. And it grew, and a group of promoters got together around 1906 and created what was called the National Wrestling Alliance. I will link you to an awesome book on that I have in digital form. It even goes into a whole lawsuit thing because blackballing is illegal, and it's a really good book. It's not big. Another book that I will link you is Chokehold. I need to write these down because I'll never remember. Let me see, do I have a pen here? One second. Okay. NWA book and Chokehold was an awesome book. I didn't really know of the guy who, Big Jim Wilson, but he was writing about an era of wrestling I was very familiar with. So I decided to get it, and I'm so glad that I did. I don't have it anymore. Another great book, there are several great books on the subject, is what's it called? I have it. I like those kind of books. They really give me history and background. Anyway, the National Wrestling Alliance actually 1906 was the first, considered the first world champion. 1946, the National Wrestling Alliance got a chokehold on their business, and then they would, any promoter that didn't work with the National Wrestling Alliance, wasn't a part of the alliance, didn't pay dues to the alliance, was considered an outlaw. We'll get more into that because there's a story that goes with that. And at any rate, they went along and they crowned world champions. They'd have yearly meetings of the members of the board, and they would determine who the world champion was going to be. Which is, what they do. So, individual promoters brought in the world champion to all their different, what were called territories. They had their own territorial NWA titles that they controlled. In 1969, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, later to become the World Wrestling Federation and later to become World Wrestling Entertainment, broke away from the National Wrestling Alliance. This was Vince McMahon Sr., and he ran New England, New York. In fact, his son to this day has a stranglehold on Madison Square Garden. New England, New York. Trying to think of where, Pennsylvania. The whole Northeast, really. There's sort of a line that forms as time moves on between the McMahons and what became left of the NWA. Shortly after that, around 1970, another promotion was born out of another dispute over who should be the world champion. And this was called the American Wrestling Association, the AWA. Now, Vince Sr. continued to be on the board even though his company no longer used the NWA champion. There's just the kind of man that he was. Vern Gagne opened the American Wrestling Association, the AWA. Actually, a couple of promoters that were with Vern did. Vern took it over eventually because they wanted Vern to be the champion. But they did it in a roundabout way because they gave the championship to someone else and immediately had Vern win the championship. So they got what they wanted, but in a roundabout way. It worked for them. The AWA was quite successful over the next 20 years. Until about 1990, things started slowing down. Unfortunately, the AWA had, how do I put this, an older group of stars. Great stars, don't get me wrong. Excuse me. They had Ox Baker, they had Baron von Raschke, or Raschke, something like that. Larry Zbyszko, they had, well, Rick Martel was their world champion. They had Greg Gagne. They had B. Brian Blair before he was B. Brian Blair. He was just Brian Blair. So they had some younger guys, but mostly established guys. And guys, Sergeant Slaughter, Colonel De Beers, guys people did want to watch when there were big, heavy feud storylines like Sergeant Slaughter versus Colonel De Beers. And, you know, people wanted to watch that. Baron von Raschke. Like I said, Larry Zbyszko, it just was a good group of guys that were getting ready to retire and move on. And so in the early 90s, the company couldn't keep up anymore, money-wise, with the other two, because by this time we had what was called the Big Three: the AWA, the NWA, and the World Wrestling Federation. The AWA encompassed the Midwest. So they were mostly they were a Minnesota-based promotion, but they did some in Canada, just above Minnesota, and a couple of other states as well. But the NWA still had control. See, this is what's really weird in the way that it was set up at this particular time. Eventually, when the AWA closed in the early 90s, the guys that didn't retire went on to either the World Wrestling Federation or the NWA, which at that time was pretty much controlled by Crockett Promotions. Now, Jim Crockett Promotions, so they became the big two, the World Wrestling Federation and the NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions. Eventually, Jim Crockett Jr. took over Jim Crockett Sr.'s work. Actually, himself, his brother Jackie, and his brother David. But Jim Jr. was most of behind the scenes. Excuse me. And they had control pretty much over the NWA Championship. Most of the territories had disappeared by then. They used to have a territory in Detroit, a territory in Northern California, a territory in Southern California. The Carolinas was Crockett's original territory. Georgia, Minnesota, the Northeast, as I mentioned, Pacific Northwest. Texas had like 3 territories. I'm not kidding. It had 3 territories. It had Von Erich, which was Dallas-Fort Worth. Then in the middle, Houston was Sam Muchnick. And then you get down further and you get Joe Blanchard, who was, yes, the father of Tully Blanchard, grandfather of Tessa Blanchard. So she's 3rd generation. So they had tons of territory. The Oklahoma territory, Alabama had a territory. It was Louisiana had a territory which was kind of blended in with Oklahoma. It was all Bill Watts territory. Alabama was the Goulis territory. Nick Goulis and his brother. Trying to remember. Memphis. Tennessee was. It was Jerry Lawler's territory, but it was Jarrett's territory. Jerry Jarrett's territory, but they worked hand in hand. So as of the territories, and Memphis was still there, but most of the territories pretty much dissolved into the two big guys by the time that the AWA was gone. Even the California territories really didn't exist anymore. Texas still existed. Well, Von Erich's territory still existed for a while. They became part of the USWA, which is what the Jarrett Lawler territory became known as when they branched into Von Erich territory and bought out Von Erich territory and added it to their Tennessee territory. If that makes sense. And I just lost all of my light. There. Anyway. It becomes confusing a little bit there, and I'm sorry. Then when it came down to just the NWA and WWE for a time, what happened was their sort of territories became a little mixed up. But it was based on old NWA boundaries, I think. That's why it was like that. And so you had Jim Crockett. Jim Crockett had controlled the Carolinas, that his father had, but he also took over Georgia Championship Wrestling. So he was running out of both offices, which isn't unusual because actually Vince McMahon Sr. ran out of his Connecticut office that still exists and out of an office in Maine. Yes, Maine. I want to say it was in Bangor, but I'm not sure. I know it was further up than Portland. I want to say it was in Bangor. Yes, he had an office in Maine, believe it or not. And so that was, and he also ran Pennsylvania. And but when you got past Pennsylvania and you went into Maryland, all of a sudden Maryland, particularly Baltimore, was Crockett territory. And of course, Virginia, West Virginia, that was all Crockett territory. Pretty much all of the South, East at that point, all the way up through Alabama, Mississippi, that area. Not past there, because at that time, Watts was still running. Hold on, gotta change that. Hey guys, I'm back with a fresh battery. Now, as I was saying, Bill Watts was still running his Oklahoma, Louisiana territory at that time. And at that time, the Pacific Northwest territory run by Don Owen, and the bottom of Oregon run by his brother Elton Owen. I think Don was running it all by then. Were still running. So there were still a couple of territories. The Sheik's Detroit territory was gone, and the NWA controlled Detroit. Crockett Promotions. Because Sheik's territory was part of NWA. So they also controlled Chicago, which was Butcher's territory. Butcher and the Bruisers territory. Dick the Bruiser. Oh crap! I can't remember his partner's name. I was something Butcher, and no, it wasn't Vachon. But like I said, he so Crockett got the Chicago territory, which is, I mean, to get those big cities, that's so important. And McMahon ended up getting, and for a while, I should mention that the territory in Toronto belonged to the NWA. It was the Tunney territory, Jack and his brother. However, Vince McMahon Jr. stole that territory, and I'll tell you how he did it. He made Jack Tunney the president of the World Wrestling Federation. It was purely a figurehead thing. And he was able to take that territory away from Crockett. To me, it was a little underhanded, but, you know. And the California territories, Crockett didn't touch that end of the world. So Vince pretty easily got the LaBelle territory and the Shires territory, which is, California was split in the middle. So, and a quick side story here. The LaBelle territory was run by Gene LaBelle and his brother, was actually run by their mother, Lillian Eaton. Well, Ruddy Piper says was a wonderful lady. She had been a boxing promoter back years before she promoted concerts. She was just a consummate promoter, and she got into wrestling. And everybody loved her. Keep this in mind, because the role of women in this is going to come around. Now, before Crockett took over the Georgia territory, the Georgia territory was run by a man named Art Gunkel and his wife, Ann Gunkel. They were part of the NWA, and Art, unfortunately, dropped dead of a heart attack in the locker room with his boys. His wife was left widowed and said, well, I'll take over the territory. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it all along with him. And they were like how the woman's going to take over the territory, you know? And it's like, really, guys? So they did not approve of her taking it over. In fact, they went over to Australia, where the NWA had a territory, and pulled a guy with a terrible reputation among boys for a few things, named Jim Barnett, out of Australia to run the Georgia territory. Oh, brother. And yeah, that was not good. They say that Jim Barnett was openly gay, which led to stories of him giving championships and pushes to guys who would do favors for him. Now, nobody knows if any of these stories are legitimate, but, and of course the guys deny the stories. But those were the rumors, those were the stories. It's very well documented. Take it for what it's worth, with a big old pinch of salt. And because I have no way of knowing. Anyway, so they brought him in. Supposedly the reason that they sent him to Australia was troubles he had promoting in the U.S. with boys or something. That's what they call the guys, the boys, or something. I don't know exactly, because I wasn't born yet when they sent him to Australia, I don't think. So they brought him back to run Georgia. It didn't last very long. he was running it side by side with Ole Anderson. I don't want to say all hand in hand because I don't think Ole would like that very much. But I wouldn't mean anything by that. It's just an expression. And it didn't last very long. Crockett took over the territory and put Ole in charge of the Georgia office. Excuse me. Stupid cold. So it ended up all one thing. Now, eventually, as both companies grew, and McMahon started doing shows out in the, well, just past the Midwest, sort of in the Plains area. That's a good way to look at it. Dakotas and Montana and that area there. He made a deal with Stampede Wrestling, which was Stu Hart's wrestling promotion in, well, they were out of Calgary, but they did all over Canada, you know, with the exception of a couple of other territories, and that Plains area of the U.S. Montana, the Dakotas, that area. And so McMahon made a deal with him. So McMahon got those states in the bargain. The reason that Stu Hart made this deal with the devil is because Stu knew at that point that his company was floundering, and he wanted his very talented sons, in particular Brett and Owen, to have a place to go, to be big, so to speak. So that's why he did that. And so now the two territories, as were left, had their areas where they didn't go past. Eventually, Bill Watts' territory got absorbed into Jim Crockett Promotions. When Bill Watts made a deal with them to bring his UWF, Universal Wrestling Federation, into Crockett Promotions, thus spreading Crockett Promotions into Louisiana and Oklahoma. Like I said, Fritz's territory was taken over by Memphis, and it still was. Up until, well, eventually Vince McMahon took over that territory. Just because he started doing shows in every state in the country. Eventually, Jim Crockett Jr., $2 million in debt in 1989, sold his company to Ted Turner and Turner Broadcasting to pay off those debts. So, now we have World Championship Wrestling and the World Wrestling Federation, the big two. And they are both playing all over the country. They're both wrestling all over the country. For the most part, though, WCW still stayed south. They would come up here once in a while, but they basically stayed south. And McMahon, he would go wherever. He didn't care. Although he mostly stayed in his zone, he did go to California and stuff like that. Don Owens was still promoting in Oregon up until he died. And his kids have a little promotion there now, but it's more of an indie than a territory now. And that's when the indies started to become a thing. They weren't territories anymore, they were independents. And there was another woman, however, who ran a promotion. See, the NWA doesn't like to admit these facts. That's why Gene LaBelle and his brother were out front of the LaBelle territory, even though their mother was the boss. So was the case with Jerry Jarrett. Jerry and Jeff were out front, Mama was the boss. Jerry's mother, Christine Jarrett, actually ran the territory. After her death, her son ran it, Jerry Lawler, with a lot of booking done by superstar Bill Dundee, who came in out of Australia. He was Australian. He wasn't nothing to do with Jim Burnett. And that's what was running. And they did really good business in Memphis, still do. They still run that Tennessee territory. Although the other companies come in when they feel like it anyway. Eventually, in the year 2001, Vince McMahon shocked the wrestling world, kind of, when he bought World Championship Wrestling. Now, if you rewind just a little bit, there was a big three by this time, again. ECW, which started out as Eastern Championship Wrestling, became Extreme Championship Wrestling, and became big. Bigger than it could handle. It was run by Todd Gordon and Paul Heyman, better known to wrestling fans as Paul E. Dangerously. Paul E. eventually took over for Todd. He bought it from Todd. And like I said, they got so big, too big for their britches, as they say, that they couldn't keep up because they didn't have the money to keep going at the pace that they were going. And you would think that the shows were bringing in money, and they were. It just wasn't coming in fast enough because he was trying to pay, he wanted to pay top dollar, but he couldn't, to the wrestlers. But he did make several stars in the industry. Some great minds for the business, like Tommy Dreamer, who's gone on to have an amazing career as a promoter, as, an agent backstage, also called a producer. All those things because he has an incredible mind for the business. Incredible respect for it, knowledge of its history, just unreal. Love Tommy. Can you tell? He married his ECW manager, Beulah McGillicuddy, not her real name, obviously. And they had a set of twins who are little actresses. So, actually, I don't think they're so little anymore. There might be about 10 now. Wow. Anyway, I don't even know if they have more kids, but I know they have twins. And he went on to have careers in other promotions, as well as his own promotion, House of Hardcore. And guys say it is run so professionally. So that's just awesome. And but it's an indie. The difference between an indie and a territory is that an independent promotion is generally in a small area. Like they'll wrestle in school gyms and little, Knights of Columbus halls and things like that where you live. Sorry, this stupid cold. That's generally what they do. So it's kind of the difference, And they have tables where you can get autographs and buy merch. And sometimes you'll have bigger guys come to these smaller areas, as a draw. So I'm waiting for Christopher Daniels to come here. Because you bet your life I will find a way to be there. If I know he's coming, I'll be there. So, and I'll definitely get pictures. Anyway, as I was saying, that's the difference. And they're pretty cool. Inexpensive to go to. We had one right over here, well, I showed you in a previous video the field where I saw wrestling. Let's see. After WCW was bought out, for about 2 years, well, no, about a year and a half, all you had was the World Wrestling Federation and ECW, which they eventually also bought out. So you literally had World Wrestling Federation at that point. And in 2002, a new kid entered the block. Actually, 2 new kids entered the block. One was NWA Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, which was being run by Jerry and Jarrett. They got permission to use the NWA championships and control over the NWA championships. So they were NWA TNA. A few years later, they moved away from the NWA, and the NWA actually started its own show, which still exists to this day, and had their own championships. What set them apart were a couple of things. First of all, homegrown talent. Most of their guys were homegrown talent. The second thing was something called the X Division, which unfortunately I didn't understand at the time. It sounded like extreme, like they were trying to do an ECW division or something. I just didn't understand. But it's not. It's about no limits, but no weight limits. No, you have to be a certain guy to be in the division. You know, you could be a 300-pound Samoa Joe or a 200-pound AJ Styles, you know. And again, homegrown talent. AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, the Motor City Machine Guns, Alex Kelly and Chris Sabin. Just incredible talent. And of course they had Jerry Lynn, who had made a name for himself in ECW, an incredible bloody feud with Rob Van Dam. That's where I became a fan, actually, of Jerry Lynn. Was that feud with Rob Van Dam was crazy. I'm not a big fan of Rob Van Dam. His wrestling or him as a person overall. I'm just not. I've seen interviews with him, and I don't care for the guy. And if you do, that's great. He has a lot of fans out there. And I'm not saying he isn't a good wrestler. He's okay. Not my style. But I've seen interviews with him. I just don't care for him. It's my opinion, and you may have a different one, and that's fine. Anyway, love Jerry Lynn. In fact, I am friends with his wife Pam on Facebook, and we actually do talk. Hi, Pam. Lovely, lovely woman. Their daughter, adorable. I shouldn't say that. She's 14 now. So maybe adorable is the wrong word because she's not a little kid anymore. That happened so freaking fast. I didn't realize how long I'd been friends with Pam. But anyway, like I said, Pam went wonderfully. And Jerry's a sweetheart. So when that happened, like I said, TNA showed up. TNA didn't have TV at first. They did weekly pay-per-views on Wednesdays. They were cheap, you know, so people watched them. And eventually they got TV on Fox Sports Net, which was not at a very ideal time slot. Then which I remember watching. Then they got on Spike TV and moved to Universal Studios in Orlando to what became known as the Impact Zone from the asylum in Tennessee. Sorry. Excuse me. So, because it became Impact Wrestling when they moved. It's still thriving to this day, even after making some serious mistakes that could have cost it a lot. And did for a while. But at the same time that TNA was coming up, another fledgling little company that we talked about before was coming up. Ring of Honor, ROH. Gabe Sapolsky and a couple other guys from RF Video created Ring of Honor Wrestling. Ring of Honor Wrestling was a different kind of wrestling. It was more for a wrestling fan like me, the purist, who wants to see wrestling, holds and maneuvers and things, chain wrestling. And you were supposed to shake hands at the beginning and end of every match. Well, they designed it so that there was one guy who wouldn't do it. Guess who that was? Christopher Daniels. And so, and he became this cult leader character because he was the fallen angel. So they took his fallen angel persona and made him a cult leader of a group called the Prophecy with some other wrestlers. There was a lady that worked with them for a little while called Simply Luscious. Terrible name. She didn't last very long. I don't know what went on there, but I think she just left the company altogether. And they brought in Allison Danger to work with them. She fit like a glove. She was perfect with CD. Perfect. So that worked out. We had a couple of other guys that I'm not as familiar with. That's why I want more of his Prophecy stuff on DVD if I can find it. I'll have to look on eBay. That might be my best bet. Because I really do want to find it. Anyway, same guys that were working for TNA were working for Ring of Honor for the most part. AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, and a few of the guys from the Georgia Independent that AJ Styles had worked for. Well, not really an independent, it was territory. NWA Wildside. Well, it was called something else before that. And some of the guys that worked with AJ there worked there. Now, both AJ and CD had gotten contracts with WCW, but of course WCW was a sinking ship. So, and CD broke his darn neck. Literally. So, yeah, that didn't work out so well. And in his first match, anyway, he fell on his head. I have lipstick on my teeth. Oh well. In a match with Mike Awesome. Anyway, he eventually TNA said, "Look, guys, you can't wrestle for them," and I told you the story about Rob Feinstein. And so they stopped. Now, TNA didn't really have house shows, but what they had was a former race car driver named Hermie Sadler, who promoted shows throughout the South with all of the TNA/NWA at that time, because it was still NWA TNA champions and and stars, and they were indie shows, I guess, but they served as TNA house shows in a way. He did put on some great shows because I've seen quite a few of them on YouTube. So, because TNA never really did house shows, I guess they do now to some degree, and have for a few years, but back in those days they didn't. They didn't have a big enough following at that point. Eventually some of the older guys came into TNA, Hogan and Flair and them, and it was a mess. But the good thing was that it didn't totally ruin things, because they knew how to keep their homegrown talent going and incorporate the older guys. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense, but they always managed to highlight the homegrown guys. And you could use the older guys to do so, like use Ric Flair to highlight AJ Styles, stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's important. And how they kept going, you know what I mean? Now, World Wrestling Federation was doing all right. I mean, they had some issues because they had brought in 2 different promotions worth of guys, and they didn't have room for it all, and they had 3 different brands going, and yeah, it was crazy. Crazy. So, eventually, it just went down to Raw and SmackDown, and everybody was absorbed that they were keeping. Because they had WCW, ECW, and WWE, and it was a disaster. So they just went down to Raw and SmackDown and said, that's good. And TNA had 2 shows by then. They had Impact and oh crap, I can't remember the name of their other show. Impact was live, the other show was taped. WWE used to do that with Raw and SmackDown. Raw would be live and SmackDown would be taped. But now they're both live. I would guess that it's probably because they don't want spoilers out there. Because you would go on and you would know what happened, and if you were interested in watching it or not, before SmackDown ever came on. The morning after the show, people who went to the show would be given the spoilers. So they didn't want that to happen anymore, I guess, so they decided to do it live. They used to do like a late night type show. It changed names a million times. Shotgun Saturday Night. All sorts of things. My eye is driving me crazy. One of my favorite shows that they did was Confidential, and it didn't last very long. It was more of a behind-the-scenes kind of a show that I loved. At any rate, they had they were on top. There was no other place to go to be, well, you could be a star in DNA. I mean, hello AJ Styles, you know. But other than that, there were, and Ring of Honor, you know, Ring of Honor had some great stars. Some great homegrown stars, like the Briscoes. No relation to the original Briscoes. Help, Colt Cabana. Who else did they grow sort of as their own? Bryan Danielson, the American Dragon, Loki. But all these guys, except for Bryan Danielson, CM Punk. most of these guys also worked TNA. Not all. For instance, Brian Danielson never worked TNA. It took a few years for any kind of competition to come up for the World Wrestling Federation. Or World Wrestling Entertainment at that point. About 2000, they lost the F because the Panda, the World Wildlife Fund sued them for using the WWF in Europe. Yeah. Pretty absurd. But their lawyers said, you know, rather than spending a lot of money to fight this, just change it. And they were already, you know, on the stock exchange as WWFE. So they just dropped the F. And World Wrestling Entertainment instead of World Wrestling Federation. So, yeah. Because their technical name at that point was WWFE, but nobody used the E. They just exchanged the F for that. Anyway. So, links. So anyway, a few years later, as Ring of Honor was becoming even more gigantic and TNA was thriving, there were places to go, you know, for wrestlers to work other than the World Wrestling Federation that were, you know, starting to become almost equal. But not equal in money. They were never going to be equal in money. Even when Dixie Carter's Panda Media took over TNA with a lot more money, it still wasn't Vince McMahon money. So anyway, eventually, born out of Ring of Honor was another company. Nobody expected what this company did. First of all, they had a pay-per-view before the company even had a name. And they used the Ring of Honor guys, the Ring of Honor everything. Ring of Honor really basically gave birth to this promotion. And guys that made their name in Japan created this promotion. I mean, there was Cody Rhodes, there was the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick, Kenny Omega, of course, Christopher Daniels, Frankie Kazarian, Scorpio Sky. I'm trying to think of who else came over with them. Hangman Adam Page, Adam Cole. They got some great women. Thunder Rosa. Britt Baker, who is a legitimate dentist with a practice. Can you imagine walking into the dentist's office, seeing that gorgeous woman, and she's the one who's going to fill your tooth? I mean, you know, if you're a guy, you're going, ah, to begin with. She doesn't have to tell you to open up and say, ah, your jaw's on the floor. So, yeah, and she's an incredible wrestler. Incredible lady. I'm a big fan, can you tell? And a few other women in this company did a pay-per-view called All In. It was spectacular. The buy rate was incredible. They sold out the arena in minutes. It was insane. Well, this company came to be known as All Elite Wrestling, AEW. And at the beginning of the following year, the year 2019, the company began officially. They were the first company to come back on TNT and TBS. They now have 2 shows their flagship show, Dynamite. Actually, they also have Dark, which is on YouTube. I will link their YouTube. Let me YouTube. And they have another show on PBS. It's insane. Explosion? I can't remember. I think that's what it is. Now, Dark, okay, that came out of terminology. A dark match is a match that is wrestled purely for the arena that you're in. It is not put on television, so they call it a dark match. And the idea behind the show, Dark, was because it's only on YouTube, either you watch it there or you watch it in the arena. It's still considered dark matches. It's the first time they ever did anything like that in wrestling. Now, the company is owned by a billionaire named Tony Khan. He also owns the Jacksonville Jaguars football team, and he recently purchased Ring of Honor Wrestling, which he's done the smart thing, by the way. He's left it completely separate from AEW, which is awesome. And I believe that's what you need to do. Ooh, we're getting long in the tooth there. So I think that was probably the wisest thing to do. Because he saved Ring of Honor that way, which is great. One of the good things about AEW was they were able to attract what most of us would consider the top guy in the business today. Over the last 30 years, one of the top guys in the business, and that is Chris Jericho. And he has had a freaking blast. I will also link his podcast, Talk of Jericho. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 links to put in on this video, so I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you enjoy the links. Excuse me. I know if you're watching it on your TV, it's harder to go to the links. What I'll do sometimes is I'll have it on my TV, and if I want to see a link, I'll go onto my tablet, pull up the video, hit pause, and read the description. So, but yeah, those are, no, not Talk of Jericho. Talk is Jericho. Good Lord. So, and that's where we stand today. Oh, and I want to give you a brief look at the women of the business. The women weren't even initially allowed to wrestle in Madison Square Garden. It took promoter Billy Wolf and his wife, all-time great wrestler, Mildred Burke, to convince them to allow him to promote women's wrestling in Madison Square Garden. Eventually, women's wrestling, was controlled by the fabulous Moolah. She did the training. She controlled where the girls wrestled. It was not pleasant for a lot of the girls. Dark Side of the Ring did a whole show on it. I can link that too. Oh boy. Moolah, Dark Side watch that, and that'll tell you a few things. Now, I will try to find a glossary of wrestling terms. Oh God, that was wrestling. But I can give you a couple. We talked about the word mark. That is still used for fans who think it's real. Fans who know it's not, but don't know exactly how it works, are called smart marks. Most wrestlers today hate those terms. Hate them. Even Roddy Piper, who's old school, doesn't like those terms. Didn't like those terms. But I'm just telling you, a ring rat, or a rat for short, was a lady who wasn't a lady. If you get my drift. Who would service the wrestlers, shall we say? So they called her a rat or a ring rat. I saw that defined as families who go to every show. No. That is not the definition of that at all. Can you hear this? And I mean, there are girls that come to pretty much every show in that arena, but they also generally service the wrestlers. Story that I'm not going to tell you. Because there have been some really, really crazy stories. But I am going to close out the vlog because it's been long enough. I'm going to go get it ready to be put up. And I am going to, while it is editing, I'm going to make a video showing you my pork rub. So join me for that. It'll be a much shorter video. Thank you so much for indulging me in my wrestling. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Please click like and subscribe. Bye-bye.